The movie begins with a voiceover of a young girl called Lily telling someone called Paul that she had a dream of the future of an Earth that had finished all its resources. For years, people exhausted the new red moon that they'd found, the so-called Lumina, but one day, things changed the course of the red moon, changing it directly to the Earth. Protected by an impenetrable magnetic field, only one astronaut was able to stop it, but as his mission got close, he disappeared. Out on the barren lands outside the Great Wall, Paul staggers on the rocky ground of the now empty Earth. A voice in his head urges him to continue his journey and seek the truth. Paul heads past the walls and to one of the towns where the few survivors lived. While he was walking around, he hears an announcement made by the government that the borders were closed until further notice. After accidentally bumping into a man, Paul asks him where he would be able to find a taxi rank, and looking around to make sure that they aren't being seen, the man tells him to follow him because he has something Paul might like. The man, known as Caesar, takes Paul to his house and shows him his flying car. Paul asks Caesar if it was for sale, and the man tells him that he can buy anything in the garage. Caesar explains that he lived inside the wall for 14 years and had never seen anyone crazy enough to drive out of the protection of the wall. Curious, Caesar asks if it was about a girl and laughs when Paul confirms that it was. The two men negotiate a price for the car after Caesar tells Paul that the car was fully charged and that he'd be able to drive for months. After receiving his payment, Caesar tells Paul that no one really knows what's out there and that he shouldn't find out either. As soon as Paul drives out of the garage, the house is flooded by the police after getting a tip of the transaction from their drones. On the way, a new broadcasting announces that there were only 7 days and a few hours left for the end of the world. And the female voice in his head keeps telling him to find the forest. Suddenly, the car starts to show a power outage and shuts down, and Paul is angry, realizing that the man who sold him the car had tricked him. As he tries to fix the car, he sees one of the tracking drones and hurries to get his gun to shoot it down before it could report his whereabouts. Paul then rushes the car down the road until he comes to a trailer that was used as a small market. The market clerk, a short-haired, petite woman, asks him what he wanted. Paul asks the woman if she had batteries that he could use to start his car, and she tells him the price and explains that he would need to wait 3 days. While he's negotiating the price, Paul notices the news on TV behind the woman, informing the public that although the government had tried to send probes up to the red moon, they were unable to go through the impenetrable magnetic field. One of the shuttles, called Aurora, was the Earth's last hope and was being piloted by none other than the famous astronaut and Paul's brother, Elliot. Paul and the woman watch live as Elliot documents his trip, finally making it through the magnetic field. Once he goes through, he realizes that the entry speed was too fast and asks to abort the mission. The control center informs him that he must continue ahead, but the shuttle was unable to withstand the heat and burns up. Paul decides to get some rest in his car and is awakened by the nightmares of his past and how he had been hit by a bolt of lightning from the red moon, forcing him to take constant medication. In her trailer, the market clerk, Elma, sees the image of Paul on her TV and the background sound explaining that he was one of the most successful astronauts who'd gotten closer to the red moon than anyone before. Realizing that he was important, Elma finds Paul out fixing his car and offers him some canned food. She asks him if he was the same Paul that the news was speaking about, and he tells her that he wasn't, asking her to leave him alone. Elma asks Paul if she can come with him, but he refuses. That night, Elma watches the news as the disappearance of Paul wrecked the world and the expectation of the people leaning heavily on his shoulders. Out in the middle of nowhere, Elliot's pod lands on Earth after he attempts to breach the red moon. After constant medical attention, the doctors inform him that the contact with the Luminar has mutated his genes, making him able to come back to life after not having a pulse for several hours. And once Elliot feels better, he heads out to find his missing brother. In the desert, Elma goes back to her house and discovers that her trailer has been destroyed by the previous owner of the market. This is the same man that's always tried to pursue some form of a romantic relationship with her. The next morning, Elliot arrives at the market out in the desert after getting reports that his brother had been there. Elliot had developed the ability to read minds and concentrate on the man's thoughts, mentally forcing him to off himself while Elma watches from the window. Screaming from fear, Elma runs out into the desert, escaping the murderous man. Paul finds Elma in the middle of nowhere and feels sorry for her, letting her stay in his car. Inside the car, Paul tells her that the journey with him would be dangerous, but she insists on coming with him, threatening to tell everyone where he is if he doesn't take her with him. Paul makes her a deal, telling her that she could travel with him for a day and that she will be on her own after that. On the road, Elma asks Paul why he wouldn't go through with the mission, but he tells her not to bother him with questions. After driving for hours, the two stop at one of the diners on the road so that Paul can make a call to his father, asking if his brother was dead. Paul's father, Henry, tells his son that his brother was doing fine and tells him that he needs to return to complete the mission. While on the phone, Paul is startled by a soldier who'd been looking for him, and he tries to escape by attacking the man in heavy armor, but is unable to land a proper punch due to the layers of protective clothing. Trying to help her friend, Elma shoots the soldier with Paul's gun, giving Paul enough time to overpower the man. The two hurry out of the diner and rush to their car, and Elma tries to calm herself by choosing new names for Paul so they can escape being detected. Elma assures Paul that he will get captured without her help, but she would only be willing to do so if he tells her what was going on. Paul tells her that he used to have visions when he was a child, and at the time, his father's project was going great, and they'd already started to mine the luminor on the Red Moon. Paul knew that what they were doing was wrong, but couldn't exactly explain why. He gathered all the information that he could about the Red Moon, and found out that it wasn't the first time that it crossed paths with Earth, bringing change every time it arrived. Paul had shown his father what he had found and told him that he needs to leave the Red Moon alone. While Elma drives, Paul's hair makes him less inconspicuous. He tells her that his father and the other researchers had assumed that they could predict the trajectory of the moon, but they were all mistaken. Elliot arrives at the diner Paul and Elma had been at and asks the owner if she'd seen Paul. She explains that she had, but he didn't look like the person that she'd seen on TV. He actually seemed run down from exhaustion. She also tells him that he was traveling with a young girl. Once he gets the necessary information from the woman, Elliot gets inside her mind and forces her to off herself by making her stick a fork in an electric wire. Out in the desert, Paul and Elma lay down on the hood of the car, enjoying the night air. Showing her a picture that he carries around, Paul tells her that he's on a journey to find the place that would help him understand what the Red Moon wanted. And tired from the long journey, the travel companions decide to get some sleep. The next morning, Paul and Elma start their journey early and are surprised by a car following them. Up ahead, they see a large red dust cloud headed their way. By using the cloud to give them cover, Paul avoids the car that's been following them, not knowing that it was only his brother. After making sure that they were safe, Paul shows Elma a video of diverse animals that France had around before the Great Extinction. While looking at the footage, Paul sees a vast forest and realizes it was the same place as his picture. Thinking that he'd been stupid to hope to find the place, Paul tells Elma that he's given up. Elma calms him down and tells him to have hope in an attempt to keep him from disappearing again, and angry, Paul tells her to leave him alone and goes to sleep. In the morning, Paul is woken up by a panicking Elma, who tells him that they've been found by soldiers dressed in all armor as well as his brother. In an attempt to escape, Paul tries to use Elma as a hostage, but the men didn't care, shooting her in the stomach. Paul drags her body to the car as the array of bullets fall upon them, driving away in a rush. Elliot follows his brother, adamant about not letting him get away a second time. The radio in the car announces that they'd be arriving at a checkpoint in a few meters, which makes Paul panic. Asking him to pass her the interface, Elma calibrates the car so it's able to fly away, missing the soldiers at the checkpoint. Before he could manage to maneuver the car away, he sees his brother Elliot charging directly toward him, causing the car to crash. Paul drags himself out of the car and meets his brother, who would also manage to survive. Trying to keep his brother from taking him back, Paul pulls a gun out and tells Elliot to stop advancing. Elliot tells Paul that he was the only one who would be able to destroy the Red Moon, and that he was sure that his father would force him into doing it. Unwilling to destroy the moon, Paul points the gun at his own head and threatens to pull the trigger. Lying on the ground, Elma begs Paul not to do it, and keeping his promise to Elma, Paul turns the gun around to Elliot and shoots him in the head. He then quickly goes to his injured friend and carefully lifts her up, hoping to find someone who can assist him. Paul then embarks on a lengthy journey, carrying Elma on his back, with the goal of getting her the medical assistance that she requires. Eventually, after a tiring trip, Paul arrives at his father's place, bringing Elma along. He's prepared to undergo the mission and is taken to the massive spaceship. Once he's launched into space, Paul struggles to control the ship as it fights to leave the atmosphere. When he gets to the moon, Paul cuts the connection with his father, leading the shuttle away. He activates the ship's self-destructive button, blowing up the ship so it cannot be used to hurt the moon. Down on Earth, Elma has gotten to the medical care facility, and she heads out into the desert to watch the sky, hoping that Paul would return safely. But as she looks up, she sees a huge explosion and realizes that Paul had chosen to destroy the ship instead. And the movie ends as Elma cries, kneeling on the desert floor, mourning her lost friend.